All right, everybody. I'm really stoked to have Pete Coco on the podcast today. I met Pete a couple of years ago when we were both at the Peter Hurley Headshot Hideaway Retreat and Conference, and it was in Tennessee. And immediately, I was so impressed. Pete owns and operates a studio in Long Island, New York, but he has a passion for photography. And since he started, I started following him. I've seen from time and time again that he is just like a huge educator and loves sharing his thoughts and everything about like the photography business. He has a YouTube channel with over 25,000 followers, and he's got great, amazing content on there. And I'll put that in the show notes just so you guys know. Pete is not only an incredibly talented headshot and portrait photographer, but he's also an incredible educator. I'm super excited to have Pete on the show today. Pete, thanks so much for being on here today.
John, awesome to be with you, my friend. Thank you so much for that very, very nice introduction. I'm going to clip that little piece and send it to my wife to remind her how lucky she is. So,
Nice, nice.
but
But
seriously, thank you for having me, man. This is awesome. It's great to be with you. And I was
yeah,
totally kidding about that, of course.
I'm so glad to have you. I've been following you since that time we met in Tennessee. I've been following your podcast, and back then it was really just starting like 2 years ago or whatever, and
Yep.
how fast it has blown up and it has grown. And I've often wondered, how does Pete have the time to put all these videos together? But
Yeah.
it's amazing content. Like I said, I'll put it in the show notes. It's definitely something to go and check out. He gives critiques on gear or reviews on gear, advice on photography and everything. It's really good stuff. But first off, you know, we talked about this a little bit beforehand, and I knew this about you already, but you're an incredibly talented upright bass player. I've seen you play, like you have little snippets on your Facebook page and stuff. And as you know, I played bass in the Navy band, but man, I was never as good as you, to be honest. And I played upright bass, but I was never like proficient on it. I got more into the electric bass side of things. How does a bass player who has his doctorate in music become an incredible photographer and educator and mentor?
Well, like it's so funny because like most people's journeys, right? It's not a straight line. And it's funny how we teach our kids like go to college, pick a career, and then you're going to do that. And it's like, but when you talk to more and more of successful people in the world, you find out real quick that oh wow, this wasn't at all a straight line. They meandered all over the place. So I kind of did that and but not in a bad way. Like it's funny because I'm still using all of my musical stuff that I learned, and I'm still working in that industry as well as like I've added photography. So I'm in a really cool place. But the short story of my career as a headshot and portrait photographer, where that really took off was during the pandemic, because it was like a do or die situation. So, but as you mentioned, I went to school for music, but I remember being well, I started in a community college because I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, like many kids who were 17. And I knew I loved music and I knew I loved photography. And I was working at a camera store at that time. So I was doing a lot of photography, and I kind of got to the point where it's like I need to make a decision, and I love both of these things equally, but I think music edges out photography, so that's why I decided to study music. But the way I started playing upright bass, you'll appreciate this. I was an electric bassist. I never played upright bass. And in high school, I was just playing in bands. I was self-taught rock and roll, and I played in my local church and whatever. And so when I got to the community college, the guy asked me in the music department, well, what instrument do you play if you want to join the music department? I said, well, I play electric bass. And he said, well, we don't have that here, but you can play upright bass. And I said to him, okay, that sounds cool. I kind of thought, yeah, that would be fun to learn. And then he said to me, okay, here's your class schedule. Orchestra starts this Tuesday at 7 p.m. I was like, oh my goodness, orchestra. I haven't even played this instrument at all. So then I had a lesson with the teacher who became one of my mentors and is still a dear friend of mine, like 25 years later. And I said to him, what am I supposed to do? Like I've never even played. And he said to me, well, you got to be in the orchestra. So, just fake it until you can get the music together. I said, what? So that's what I did. I go and we were doing if for those music people who are listening, we were doing Schubert's Unfinished Symphony, which has this like slow bass introduction, which is like this cool kind of like somber introduction. So I was able to play the first few notes. I could kind of figure it out. And so I go to the rehearsal. And then during the break, like halfway through, the other bass player who was there was like, "Wow, man, you sound great. How long have you been playing?" So that's how I started upright bass. But then I went to school for music. I studied jazz. I became a jazz musician. And the whole time I was always involved in the photo industry. I worked in camera stores. I worked for almost 10 years at Cometa Camera, which was a huge camera store out on Long Island. And then I freelanced and I did a lot of stuff on the side. So photography was always part of my journey. Then after I graduated with my master's degree, I started a music school. And so that's what I did as my career. And I still actually run this music school 20 years later. But what happened was we started a musical theater program around 2016 or so. And we told the kids, bring in a headshot for our, we're going to put up a board at the show. And so the kids would bring in these horrible photos, they would be like iPhone photos or like, like the horrible school photo. So I said, I can definitely do better than that. So one day I asked the parents, bring all your kids. I'm going to take their headshot. And so they're like, okay, cool. And I did it without, like, I got like an umbrella or something and like a blue backdrop. And so they looked okay. And I was like, okay, I'm pretty good at this. This is cool. And I said to myself, but I really like to learn how to do this well. And then I just went to YouTube and I typed in how to take headshots. And then this video pops up of this insane guy ranting and raving. He's jumping around. He's talking about, squinching and this and that. And that's how I found Peter Hurley. And so I remember watching the video. I'm like, this guy's nuts. And then I
And
watched
it's
the
not
second
just on
video.
video, it's in person too.
Yeah,
He's the same thing he's on video, he is in person. He's
yeah, it's
crazy.
true.
It's in a good way. He's
In
crazy
a
in a
good
good way.
way, yeah. Well, and by the time I watched like the second video, I was like, this guy's a genius. And then and then I joined the crew and I started working on it still on the side. And then the pandemic happened. And like many people, I was forced to shut my business down and we had to go virtual. So we lost half of our clients at my music school immediately. So I had an empty space and I had debt and I had all of these issues like a lot of people were going through. It was a very dark time for my family and then other stuff going on and which I won't get into. And so one day I said, I got to get rid of this photography gear. I need the money. And so I started putting stuff for sale online. I spoke to my wife and she said, what are you crazy? Like now is the time when you should be doing this. Like do it and you can make money doing this. And so I decided, all right, I'm going to give it one last shot. And around that same time, like within a day, one of my students contacted me because I had done like just a couple of headshots for some of my students and some colleagues that I worked with at the college I was adjunct in. I was an adjunct at the time. And I almost texted him back and said, no, man, I don't do that anymore. But because of this conversation with my wife, I made the decision that this will be either the last headshot I take or the beginning of my new headshot business, depending on how this goes. Because I was in such a dark place, And so kid comes in and I had an empty building that I was using for, partially for some headshot stuff now and then, but really I was using it for music lessons and we couldn't have groups assemble, but kind of at that time they opened things up a little bit so you could do one-on-one. That's why I was able to schedule it. So he comes in, I take the headshot, everything goes well, it was awesome. I post it, and then Peter Hurley is like, "Oh, this is an awesome headshot, Pete." And it was like it kind of blew up a little bit in a good way for me that I got a lot of positive reaction to this kid's headshot. And that was how I just decided, all right, I'm going to do this. And so I just decided 100% I'm going into this. I'm going to do it. I made it a goal to become an associate in the headshot crew. I made it a goal to actually get, X number of clients, make X number of money. And fast forward it's a little under maybe around 3 years at this point. And now I have, this studio that I'm in. That's awesome. I have my own studio and I still have my music school. And so technically photography is still my part-time job, but you know, I'm happy to say that like I'm making like a full-time living with the photography, doing it part-time. So it's really been an awesome journey for me, you know?
Dude, that's awesome, man. I mean, and it's coming up on 4 years. March this year is 4 years of when we shut down because I don't know if you remember, but I was supposed to come. I was going to surprise my wife to New York with a New York trip. And it was during spring break, and the country shut down like right at the week before, and
Yeah.
we ended up not going. And similar to you, that's when I started, because I, like we were talking right before we got on here, I was doing sports photography. And after I did the pandemic came, there was no more sports to shoot because everything got
Right.
shut down. And then even when
Right.
they brought sports photography back, NBA was in a bubble, and they only had pool photographers, and it was just the same people that were in there all the time. And even when, like, I remember the first year that the Texans came back and started doing it, it was like nobody was in the stands. There was a very, very small amount of, and so I was just, and this is before I had already decided to go a different direction. But same like with you though. I was like, I just said I got to do something different. I don't want to keep doing. I have a very similar story in the sense of I've done a little bit of everything. I have a history degree,
Oh,
and I
cool.
I worked as a security manager for a large school district and all this stuff. And so I've done all these crazy things. I worked in the oil and gas world for a while, but every bit and piece of those things led to where I am today and
Exactly.
have all played into what I do today. Like now I have staff that I work with, and I'm a project manager. I'm managing my staff, and all those things that I did leading up to this point helped me to get to that. And then, the sports photography, I, I, I do a lot of dog photography, and I joke sometimes I feel like I'm a journalist, and I have to catch whatever I can get because it's like it's constant moving. It's not like headshots where you can say move your chin here, move your chin over there, like bring your chin out, whatever. It's I capture what I can get because they don't like respond the same way as humans. But
Right.
no, it's awesome to hear that you were like on the verge of just giving it up, throwing in the towel. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are saying that same thing in their own photography business, or that they've thought about starting it and they just like they're wanting to give up before they even really get going. What kind of advice? I'm going a little out of order than my questions because you just led into this. What kind of
Mhm.
advice would you give somebody that's in that place that you were in? And I was in the same place of just like, man, this sucks. I'm not making any money. I don't know how to price myself. I don't know how to sell myself. I don't know how to bring people in the door. What would the biggest advice that you would give somebody that's like in that position and trying to, you know, jumpstart their business?
Well, I can tell you what worked for me, right? The first thing I will say about that is really it all begins in your mind and with your mindset. And I remember even before the pandemic, I had a lot of business struggles. I had like a former partner, and it was always like a nightmare with that person. And so I remember sitting around and thinking to myself, I made a mistake. I should have went into photography. So there was a time like where I was doing that. And then around that time, Peter actually in the crew had posted like some Bob Proctor video in the headshot crew, and so I started watching this video and I kind of like chuckled at it, like, oh yeah, it's like, like you can do it, and like the self-help motivational stuff. But then I actually started to make a conscious effort to change my mindset and to believe that I could do it, because I would previously sit there and be like, I can't do this. And I'd look at other photographers and I wouldn't envy them in sort of like a jealous sort of way, but I would just feel bad for myself and be like, what? I can't do that. Why? And so it really did start in my mind. And even like a few years before I actually made the plunge into doing it as a business, I feel like I laid the groundwork by just beginning to change my mindset. And now that's something that takes a long time. It's also, there's so much in there, like depending on how you were raised, what kind of parents you had, what kind of siblings you had, the kinds of things that you were fed as a child. Not, I don't mean food, but the kinds of thoughts that were fed into you, and the way you were critiqued. And so I had great parents and a great upbringing, but but we also, like, my dad owned his own business and struggled so many times. I remember, like, you know, not having money for new shoes or stuff like this. And so I had like a lot of negative baggage attached to me as an entrepreneur. And I kind of just expected, like, whoa, if you're gonna run a business, you're gonna struggle. It's not, you so I had to start fixing a lot of that. So that was sort of where I think if you want to do it, start envisioning it, start planning it. Your thoughts will become what you are and what you do. So, and every great thing that man has done, like, started with someone thinking, hey, I'm going to build a building that's 100 stories high. No one had ever done it before, and I will be the first to do that. So I think you have to start with that belief in your mind and make sure that you're cultivating that positivity. Then, I mean, once you make the decision to do it, you just have to commit to doing it. Like, there's so many times where we start stuff and then we give up because we have some roadblocks. And the people who are successful and the people who win at whatever it is, if you want to win at being in being a business person, or if you want to win at being a musician, or whatever it is, you just don't give up. And I learned a lot of lessons from my music career because I had some negative experiences with other musicians. And I mean, if you're a jazz musician in New York, I mean, you're going to have negative experiences with people. You're going to be like sidelined by people. You're going to have people tell you suck, like, to your face, and tell you, get off the stage, or whatever it is. And so I let people, with my music career, I realized that I kind of let people influence me by what they thought and what they expected out of me as a musician. And so when I started my photography journey, and when I started and I said, I'm going to make this a successful business, I was like, well, the first thing I'm going to do is not tell anyone, not talk about it. And I'm also not going to give a crap what anyone else says or thinks of what I'm doing. And that was a big thing for me because, your family, unfortunately, sometimes will be the biggest roadblock if you want to do something different with your life, because they have expectations for you. And also, even if they want what's best for you, they don't sometimes understand what you're doing. And so I had mentioned when I started doing headshots, I was at like a relative's house, and a couple of people so I posted some photos or whatever, and they're like, "Oh, so you're doing headshots now?" And they just looked at me with this perplexed look, and I was like, "Yeah, you mean like a Sears like portrait studio, or like school photos?" And I was just like, "No." And so I learned early on, like, keep it close. And because what you will be impacted negatively by probably a lot of people who are closest to you, and they don't mean to do it, but a lot of times it just happens because even your parents, right, they want what's best for you, but they might not understand the vision you have. So I would say, make a vision, have a plan, have a vision, and keep it close, and then just put your head down and freaking do it. And it's like, we get lost in all of this nonsense and I'm not discounting, like, planning, being strategic, having a business plan, goal setting, and having all this stuff, and good marketing, and all of this kind of stuff. But when push comes to shove, the people who are really going to be successful are the ones who just decide, like, well, no matter what, I'm not going to give up, and I'm going to do it. So my approach is like a three-pronged approach now. What with becoming, if you want, like, be a successful headshot portrait photographer, number one, you have to be freaking awesome at it. Like, there's no excuse. You can't, and you'll hear photographers. One of the things that drives me nuts, John, is I hear photographers and I see photographers, like, on Instagram, and like wanting to promote their own coaching or whatever, and they say, I'm not even that good, but I make six figures a year. And you know what? That's such nonsense. And it's also a terrible thing to teach people who want to become great at something. So I know for me, I'm getting great clients, not because my work is mediocre, because my work is great. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way, but I mean, like, it stands apart from other people in my field and in my area. And so I think your work needs to be great. You need to hone your skills. Number two, you need to know how to run a business. So you have to learn business skills. And number three, as I mentioned, you have to have like a mindset that works and helps grow your business. And that also takes, all these things take time. And when it comes to like, one other thing I'll mention before I finish this long answer is having gone through like years and years and years of schooling as a musician and getting a doctorate in music. Like I appreciate education. I'm very glad that I did it, and I feel like it's really shaped a lot of who I am today. But when I started my photo business, I knew the first thing I said when I started, like, all right, I got to make this, I got to become a great headshot photographer now. The first thing I said to myself was, well, the last thing I'm going to do is go to school for it. Because when you want to learn a craft, an artistic, and I consider what we do is really an artistic craft, right?
Mhm.
Portraiture, it's an artistic trade. You need a mentor. You do not need 4 years of college learning about, I don't know, all this history of photography. All that's wonderful. And I think that will make you much better at what you do. But if you want you want to start a business and be successful and make it happen, you need a mentor. So for me, mentorship was everything. So like hooking up with Peter, doing multiple on location headshot intensives with Peter. That's where I learned everything about taking headshots. And then my other big mentor is Ivan Weiss, the portrait photographer out of London. And Ivan was my inspiration for portraiture. And so get yourself a mentor is another great way to do it. And photographers will spend like $1,500 on a lens without blinking, right? They'll be like, this lens is going to make me such a better photographer. No, it won't. It's not going to make you, you're not going to be any better than you were the day before. You're just going to have another piece of gear that the novelty wears off in a few days, and that's the end of that. But if you spend $1,500 going to a live workshop with one of the best mentor photographers, in the world, like my other big influence is Felix Coons, so I invested in myself by going to one of his workshops, and you learn more in a day that way than you'll learn, like buying all the gear you think you need. So
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and it was one of my questions that we'll get to in a bit about gear itself, because I know you're kind of a gearhead and you've used a bunch of different kind of stuff, but we'll hold off on that for a second. But you said a lot of great points, and the more you talk, the more I realize, wow, we have a lot more in common than I thought. Because like my parents had, they weren't entrepreneurs or anything, but they had. I didn't have like everything in the world handed to me and all that stuff, and so there was times where it's like, hey, we're gonna have shoes, or like, when are we gonna buy school clothes and stuff? I mean, but my parents did do as the best they could to take care of us and everything. But in my mind, there was sometimes it's just like you can never succeed in life because life is just a struggle and you have to get through that. I love what you say about mindset. I find so many people that I talk to in the photography world, that are trying to get going and trying to get started. That's the biggest thing I feel like they get hung up on. And then they look at photographers, I know a lot of people look at me and go, "Wow, you got so successful and you did so much in such a quick time. What's your secret?" I'm like, "I worked my ass off for it. That's my secret, and when it sucked and when things were not going well, I worked my ass off even more to make sure that that suck didn't turn into dead business, and I think that's the hardest part for people to get over. I think we live in a world, unfortunately, that we want it now, and if I don't have results now, then it's not worth pursuing. And anything good in life is it's going to take you a while to pursue it. I mean, man, I can't remember exactly when it was, but I quit my job a little over a year after I really started pursuing this. But I mean, what I tell people, it's like I didn't really take much of a paycheck for myself in that first, 6 months to 8 months. I paid myself a little, but I had just invested all that money back into the business, back into marketing, back into, like you're saying, coaching and growth and all that stuff, because I knew that investment would pay off in the long run. Um, but and I had a long-term plan. It wasn't, hey, I'm going to quit my job tomorrow. I see so many people that go, I got a studio space and I have no clients and I'm going to quit my job. I'm like, no, don't do that.
right,
Don't do that yet.
backwards. You're doing it
Yeah, right,
backwards.
right.
Hmm.
I mean, but it takes work. I was working. I mean, thankfully I have a wife that is just amazing and
Me
was
too.
willing to be um the whole family while I was working basically two full-time jobs. I would literally go from one job and then shoot photos at night and on the weekends. And I was working all the time to get to that point where I was like, I could finally take myself away. So it's such a good point that it's so much of your mindset. We get in our way more than anything.
Yep.
Like I hear people say that, and I've said this to people. I'm like, I've seen plenty of not very good photographers make plenty of money, and I don't disagree that you should be honing your craft and trying to get better at your craft and all that stuff. I don't disagree with that in any way, shape, or form. But if you can't get past the mindset, it doesn't matter how like you could be the best photographer in the world, but if you're terrible at business and you don't want to learn business and everything, then you're not going to be successful. You have
Right.
to learn that part. And it's a skill for photographers that is hard because we're creatives. We're not business minded in a lot of ways. A lot of them are. And so it's trying to get that. But I love that you say find yourself mentors and find yourself people that are, like I used to coach, high school sports, and I followed a lot of the big college sports coaches and stuff. And you always hear a commonality with big, great college sports guys like Nick Saban and Bill Belichick and all those kind of guys. They say hire people that are better than you.
Mm.
Hire people that are better than you to be your assistants, to be your mentors, to be your coach, or whatever, because you're going to learn something from them, but they're going to and give something back. So it's like hiring a coach that is better than you. And when you get to like you and I are at a different level than people that are just starting. Now we got to go an upper level of who we're going to hire next,
Right.
and that's going to help us and improve something in our business. But that's gold, what you're saying. So I want to go on your three prongs. Remind me, it's photo, business,
So
running a business, and then
right.
marketing. Is that
No, mine. So it's mindset,
mindset?
uh, your skills as a photographer,
Skills
and
as a photographer.
the business part.
Mindset.
And you're so right,
So
man.
mindset was
Like,
the one I didn't write down.
yeah, and but you're so right because it's like you can be. I know some musicians, for instance, and photographers who are like literally at a genius level with the art they create, but they can't manage to get to a location on time to do what needs to be done, right? So it is the business skills are so much a part of it. And not just the business skills, like knowing how to run a business and I'm like you, I get it. Like we creatives don't like doing the businessy stuff lots of time, but you have to do it.
Yeah.
But the other thing that you said that I just want to jump on for a second is, yeah, dude, like your entrepreneurship is not for the faint of heart. It really is not. And so if you want to work 9 to 5 and clock out at 5 and then go home and enjoy your day and not think about it and this and that, then this is not for you. I regularly will work 12-hour days because now I'm running two businesses. So I'll have headshots or portraits in the morning, and then I'll do stuff like this, do podcast interviews or make a YouTube video. So I might be doing that at like 9 a.m. to like 1 p.m. And then I head down the block to my other business and I stay there until 9 p.m. So you really have to work hard. But if you enjoy it and you love it and it's fulfilling, it's still a lot of work. It's not like, it's funny when people say, do something you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Like, well, that's simply not true. But the work you do will be very fulfilling. That's more accurate, I think, because you're always going to have those hard days.
Well,
But
and I
yeah,
think,
dude.
yeah, I agree with you in that statement. Like, I love coming to my studio. I love
Right.
coming into my place. I love, even when it's like a day like this, where you don't have any sessions or anything like that. But I love there where when I was going to my 9 to 5 job before started my business, is like, oh, I got to go to work today.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
and all that stuff. It just felt like a grind. But when you're doing your own thing and you have there's a pride thing I think that comes with that. That's part of that whole, like, I find joy in coming to do what I get to do because it's mine. It's not somebody
Right.
else's, that I'm working for or doing something for. It's my thing that I've created and all that stuff. So
Time is also a big part of it. Like I rather worked a 12-hour day where the time that I put into whatever I'm doing is under my own control and supervision than be forced to be somewhere doing something for someone else on their time.
Right.
So I know for me personally, one of the reasons why, because my parents told me, get a music education degree and just work in a school. And I just knew myself, thankfully, I knew myself well enough to know that I can't go to the same place all day long every day, and that the monotony of that routine just would have sucked the life out of me. And that's just me personally. So I think a big part of also being successful in business is knowing yourself, knowing the kind of personality you have. I mean, some people strive on that, right? On that like consistency. I do the same thing every day and I'm happy. But for me, I like having different things every day. So I like having a mix of things. So if I have a portrait shoot today, I make a video tomorrow, a location gig, and then I teach some music lessons. I do this, I do that. That's more in line with my personality. And for me at this point, being in my mid 40s, I just couldn't see myself working for people, because you're right. It's like it's sort of it's a pride thing in a good way, like where you feel proud of what you've accomplished. But also I just can't take directions from people at this point, which maybe is a personality flaw, but I know myself and I know that I just couldn't work for a boss at this point. So I have to make it work for myself. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way. I just mean like when you get used to doing your own thing and being on your own schedule, it becomes very difficult to get back into that, rat race. Plus, I just wouldn't want to be commuting. I did a bunch of location gigs over the past couple of months where it almost felt like I was a commuter because I was in a different institution every day doing like a big location gig. And every day I would go home to my wife and I'd say, I don't know how people do this commuting every day. It is like it's torture. It really sucks the life out of you. So I think if you want to be doing the business thing, you got to know yourself, know what you want out of it too. I right now I'm really happy with the way my business is. It's not the only thing I do, photography, but it's a good place that I'm in. So that's part of it too. And I totally agree with you, man. Like if you have a good job, don't go quitting your job and signing a lease on a studio with no clients. You do it on the nights and weekends, you make it work, you hustle, you do it on your days off until you can make that happen. And then I have people, I tell them, don't open a studio. Why would you do that? Pick a room in your house. I know people who are very successful and they use their living room for their shoots. They
Right.
move the furniture out of the way, set up a headshot bay, and they're making six figures a year like that because most clients don't care. They want a good product. So
Yeah, that's a
you're
mindset that we have for ourselves that
yeah,
people, like, don't want to come into our home or I don't want to have my home. And I mean, it's to each their own. I mean, for us, it's like I don't have a home that really fit that that thing, I mean, yeah, because we don't have a cordoned off room that would be big enough to do, that kind of stuff. But in how my business kind of transgressed and it just started blowing up and everything. It's just like I have to have a space, but I was able to afford it when I started doing that.
right,
I mean, it's
exactly.
getting to a place where you have to be able to afford those things and not. I feel like some people put the cart before the horse. It's kind of like
Right.
it's kind of like the lens example you said. If I buy this lens, it'll bring me clients. If I open this studio, people will come. I mean, I live in my studio here in Houston is right in a strip center, and one of the most popular pie places in the city of Houston is right next door to me. And I thought when I got this place, I was like, oh, I get a lot of foot traffic. People will see my work and they'll come in and they'll blah, blah. We do get people come in and they, ask questions, and we'll get a couple people, but it's not like that's not how I'm gaining business. It's marketing
Right.
and all that kind of stuff. But
Same for
um,
me.
yeah, but it's just it's you think that if I do this, then this will happen, right? So I want to go through a little bit of these pillars that you're talking about, the three things. The one photography. You mentioned the lens thing, and I wanted to talk to you about this specifically because you are a gear guy, and I think you and I see a lot along the lines of this kind of stuff. Do you think, like, I would love to hear your response to this. What, like, does somebody have to have the top of the line best gear to start making it in this business? Why or why not?
So the answer is a resounding no, of course, which I think most of us, if we've done this, we realize that. And now I take a kind of pragmatic approach to this. this doesn't also doesn't mean you should buy the cheapest crap, because that also is going to be a mistake as well. So when I started my headshot business, I had a Canon 5D Mark III, which was already, I bought it used. It was already probably like 7 or 8 years old at the time. And a Canon 70 to 200 2.8, the original one, which is about 20 years old. So that's just what I already had. And that camera was good enough. And honestly, I could pull it out. I have it in the drawer here in front of me today. I could pull it out of the drawer and use it for a session today, later today, and it would still do the job. So I think, you want to invest in gear that's going to get the job done, but you don't need to spend 30 grand on gear. I think it's more important also, like, the camera gear is always the most fun stuff to purchase, right? Like a new lens, a new camera. That brings the most fun to us. It's the most joyful, like, toy kind of experience. But I think you're better off to invest that money a little bit more in lights and things like that. So the thing you don't want to do, which some people do, is they'll go buy like the cheapest, like Amazon LED panel garbage. And the problem with doing that is those things are not going to give you consistent color. They're going to have hot spots and stuff like that. So I would say if you're investing, no, you don't need the top of the line stuff if you don't have any clients. And even if you do have clients, you don't need the top of the line stuff. But I would put more of my money into like buying good lights and even buying good stands. One of the big mistakes I made early on is I'd buy these very cheap stands and they would just break all the time. They made my life miserable trying to
All
do a
over
shoot.
with just a breath.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Right.
You would
Yeah. And
try
then
to hang like you would try to hang a canvas on something that wasn't built to make it for a canvas.
right. So yeah, that's that for me. Put the money, put a decent amount of money in your camera, get something good, and then put more of that investment into getting a good light system. And I use a Flex kit, Westcott Flex kit now, which is a very, very expensive lighting kit. And so if you're able to grow your business to get something like that, that I feel like will make a big difference in just making it easier to bring your vision to life. But I also have some very inexpensive continuous lights that I use for location gigs and things like that that work very well. So yeah, there you go.
Well, and I think one of the things you said too when you first started, and I did the same thing when I started. I bought used. I think
Right.
sometimes people think I got to have the brand new thing that's out or whatever. And I always tell people that are getting started, especially with lenses, bodies are a little different. I mean, somewhat different, but not completely. But mpb.com was my friend, and I
Right.
was on there all the time. And I would buy used almost every single lens until I finally got my business running and rolling, was used. I never bought anything. I think the only thing I ever bought that was brand new was a 7D Mark II camera. But even the lens that I bought for that was used from MPB. And because used lenses last a long time
They
unless you're
do.
like beating them up and you're
Right.
like whatever. I mean, it's just glass, unless if you're taking care of it, it's going to last a good long time. My first big lens was I got a 300 millimeter lens that I mean I still have today. I mean, Canon doesn't even service it anymore, but it still works. Um, but I would say, like, if you're looking for something when you're first starting, like you said, start with used stuff. Go to some place and find something used. Like as soon as as soon as the R5, the next R5 comes out, the R5 that's currently out is going to drop in like $2,000 used,
Yep.
everywhere that it's going, because everybody's going to off their R5s and then they're going to go buy the new thing,
It's
and you can
crazy.
benefit from that person that's trying to off their R5, right?
Yeah, and then
Uh,
you'll have people like me doing YouTube videos saying why you need the R5 Mark II and the R and 45 megapixels isn't good enough. You need 60 megapixels. Like, it just doesn't end.
well, and the funny thing about the megapixel size is 90%, like 99% of your clients are never going to need a megapixel like type of sensor like that for their
Yep.
files or anything like that.
No.
So it's really, really funny. But I mean, even with lenses, I find people that are like lens hounds, and I got into that world for a little short period, and then I realized I have a 50 millimeter 1.2 that I spent like 2 grand on, and I'm like, I hardly ever use it, man. And it's just like, why did I buy this thing? Because of the nature of my business and the nature of what I do. I need something that's quick acting when it comes to zooming in and out because my
Right.
subjects move and everything. And so I want to be able to take a wide and a close shot really, really fast. So
Right.
my camera lens that I use 99% of the time is a 24 to 105. And then
Yeah.
people are like, well, I got to get a 1.2 or a, it's just like, if you're shooting portrait photography in a studio, why do you need to go down to 1.2? You're using lights, you're using it's like very rarely do you need to go down to that. I mean, I'm always shooting at like 6.3, like for families and stuff. So it's just like, why am I so worried about that? But I think you hit like a great thing about when you're getting gear, when you're first starting, it doesn't have to be the latest, greatest. It can be the previous entity of whatever you're buying, and you can get it for a fraction of the price. You don't have to get the newest, latest thing that any of the manufacturers have put out. Your clients will not know the difference, but it's how you manipulate that camera that's the
Right.
most important thing. I've seen people back, I don't even know what the cheap brands are now for Canon, but like with the T3i and all that stuff. I've seen people make amazing pictures with a T3i, and it's like the one where you would go and buy at Best Buy, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying, for like $300. So yeah, that's great advice. So with the business side, let's move on to the business side of things. What is some of the biggest things and biggest advice you would give somebody like that's like going into business? And I want to like let's I want to talk specifically
Okay.
pricing because I know that's a huge thing, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts as you grew your business, how pricing is looked, and you don't have to do specifics and stuff, but how did you kind of model your pricing as you grew? Because when you're first starting, you don't know what you should price yourself. Some people just do trade for whatever just to get a portfolio. Where do you feel like you can break that trade for portfolio purposes and actually start making money? Where do you think people should start looking at that and then raising their prices and then getting to a certain level that's comfortable to them?
I think it starts with what your goals are. So some people want like a side hustle, right? Some people want to go full time. So those are questions you should ask as you figure that out. I will say when it comes to like doing stuff for free for in order to build your business, my recommendation with that is just, be wise about how you do that. The thing you don't want to do, which I see photographers do who are just getting started, is they'll go on social media and they'll post stuff saying, "Hey, I'm looking for people to photograph and, I just started and this and that." And so I wouldn't recommend doing that because you're setting yourself up for building a reputation as, "Oh, that's the guy who just takes pictures of people for free and always is posting looking for people to photograph." There's nothing wrong with doing those TFP style shoots. We all do them, and you need to do it to learn your skills. But you have to be. For me, I know that I've done it in a way, just being more um, kind of structured about what my goals are for it. So, for instance, I won't it's very rare if I have a piece of gear I need to review for a YouTube video. Sometimes I'll just post something as a story on Instagram. "Hey, I'm looking for someone who's around." But that's very, very rare for me, and I'll never do that for like portrait shooting. And actually, I haven't done even that in a while because you just don't want people to think, "Well, why should I pay for anything from this person who was just going to do it for free?" But what I did is I specifically wanted to work with certain musicians in the jazz world because as a jazz musician myself, I'm part of that world, but I also want to be known and wanted to be known as someone who's a photographer for that. And so I found someone who had a big social media following, a great look, very well known in the community. And so I would reach out specifically, I've done this a number of times, to certain people who I want to work with and then offer it as something that's value. So I say, "Hey, I'd love to do a shoot with you. I can send you details if you're interested. Check out my portfolio." And then, of course, they respond, "Yeah, that's great." And then I say, "Well, here's what I normally charge. If you want to do a shoot with me, I would waive my session fee and include 4 images, and then beyond that, you have the option to purchase any more if you like them. So I think even with the free shoots, you want to create value and make sure they know what they're getting. But I did that not just with anyone. It was when I do a shoot for free, it's with someone who I know is either in the community I want to grow in and get more business from, or has a look that's going to make people respond to my portfolio. So that's how you have to think about it. But doing that with certain musicians has opened the door to working with other musicians and being paid and making good money that way. So just be strategic about it when you're doing the free stuff. When it comes to pricing,
Before
yeah, go
you
ahead.
go forward, I want to just
Mhm.
piggyback a little bit on that because it's a lesson learned with me, and I want to reiterate what you said. Be specific on what you're going to give them, because
Right.
that was a big mistake that I made when I first started this whole thing. I would put out like I did the social media. Hey, I'm looking to do something like this, and you get every Tom, Dick, and Harry, and it's people that you're like, man, I wouldn't put that person in my portfolio,
Exactly.
and then it's just like you're doing stuff and it's kind of a time waster. You got to find people that you specifically want, but then also, like, I love what you say, because that's something that I've learned a lot, but not recently but over a long time ago, is you have to say the value. My sessions are normally $300. My photos are X amount of dollars. I'm going to give you two or three. If you want to buy extras, you can. Because
Right.
what often happens is people say, I'm going to let you come in here and I'm going to do photos for you, and I'm going to give you everything that I take or everything that I keep and all that stuff. And then you're not specific with it. And then they're like, you got to set expectations. You got to set a
Right.
standard of what they're expecting, because if you don't do that, what's going to happen, what I found happened before, is people have their expectation of what they're supposed to get out of this, and you have your expectation of what you're going to give them. And if you haven't talked about that and haven't figured that out ahead of time, when you deliver, even though it was free, they're going to get pissed off, and they're not going to be happy, and they're not going to be satisfied, and they're going to like
Yep.
bad mouth you and all that stuff. And it's just like, dude, I gave you a free shoot. Like, that's what you're thinking, but you didn't do your due diligence in making sure that you set that expectation. So that's really good. So moving
Yep.
forward, I just wanted to reiterate, I think that's really sound advice.
And
But let's talk.
even no, with paid clients too, setting expectations is everything. They should know exactly what to expect. Whatever you leave kind of in a gray area, you're just going to cause yourself problems in the long run. The other thing is, like, to wrap up that particular topic, if when you post on your social media, hey, I'm looking for someone to photograph, it's free or whatever, you're going to get bottom feeder people who are too cheap to pay anyone for it, and like, oh, I can get this for free, I'm going to go do this. So it's almost like you're attracting the worst kind of clients. Not all the time, but there's going to be a big amount of times where you'll get people who just, they're already the person who would never pay for your services at the regular price, and they're always looking for some kind of a deal, so they're already not going to be the ideal kind of client. And then 100%, like you said, what do you need to shoot people for that are not going to, you're not going to want to put on your website or on your Instagram? They're not helping your portfolio. And like it or not, you need people with a cool look. So you got to go for people who have a look that's going to draw people to the portfolio. That doesn't mean everyone has to look like a model, and you don't want just to have models on your portfolio unless that's all you want to shoot. But if you're going for professional headshots, you know, you want people of all ages and sex and age and color and body type. But you can find people in all these categories who have a great look and an energy. So it's more about that for me. But yeah, just giving away corporate headshots for no reason, and then having someone who you're like, this was a miserable experience and I can't even post any of these photos because this person looks terrible. Who needs that?
Yeah, no, that's great. So let's continue just real quick on the pricing thing. You were saying, like,
Right.
once you get past that phase, you were starting to talk about like actually pricing yourself and whatever.
Well, I did it concurrently. So as I was hitting up people for TFP shoots, I was also pricing, and when I started, I tried to find a price that showed me as um not the cheapest guy on the block. I never wanted to be that. So there was a little bit of a value based in that. But, but I also made sure that my website had, even at the beginning, it looked okay. And I made sure there was decent work on there early on. So I think first thing you should do is you should have a website that is going to drive traffic to you and business to you. Because just like you said before, John, I have the same thing. Like behind me, there's a road, there's like thousands of cars driving up and down it every day. I'm in a strip of probably like 20 or 30 stores right on this block, and I get very little foot traffic and very little in the way of drive-by traffic. So most of my traffic is now website, Google Ads is something that I do that people either swear by or don't like. I think that there's a place for them, and now referrals. So that's where I do it. One of the things I also recommend when it comes to price, like I can tell you what I charge, but it's really not. I don't think it's meaningful for people because it really is dependent on your market.
I agree. I agree.
You
Like, I
know,
think it's hard because like you see some people, and I know in the headshot world, there's huge discrepancies between there's one
right,
guy that's charging $100 a photo, and there's other
right,
guys that are charging 500 a photo. If I tried to charge 500 a photo here, I'd be laughed off the planet, like where
right.
I'm at.
And there's people saying, just raise your prices, just raise your prices, just raise your prices, and you should be charging this and you should be charging that. Well, I can tell you that for me, in being in business for 25 years, I would never want to just raise my prices as a business model and a business plan. You need to know your market. Now, I'm in New York. I'm a stone's throw from New York City. My studio is in one of the most expensive zip codes in the country. So I can charge a price that's a lot higher than someone who is in a place where you don't have that kind of overhead. You don't have people. The medium income is very different. So you have to know your market. But I think that if you get your work to a place where it's really stellar and above a cut above the rest, then you can charge a premium for your market. Now, what that number is going to change, right? But that's where you want to get. So pricing, I use, like many people who we associate and people in the headshot crew, I use the method of a session fee and then a very high per image fee. I don't do proof galleries, and while I very rarely do proof galleries, but I'm working with mainly I'm talking about for one-on-one corporate clients and even acting clients. Like I will get them to pick their photos while here, because the method that I use, it's not salesy or pushy. And like it's not like I refuse to give a proof gallery. I like calling the images with them because I know what the casting directors are going to look for. So if I get pushback, I will send a proof gallery, but I charge for it because I rather have them they pay for the session to book, and then they pay for the images at the end. And then because usually you send them home with a gallery and they just pick the ones you've already culled it down to a lot of times. And it just adds a lot of work and a lot of annoyance for you
the
as the
the
photographer.
the other side of it too, and this is good for the listener to know from experience, and I'm sure you've had the same experience with the proofing galleries, so to speak, or whatever, is when you start doing stuff like that and you can't have an interaction with your client.
Exactly.
Like, so when somebody says, hey, can you take that laugh line out? If you take that laugh line out, then that would be a great picture. But they see the laugh line and they don't ask that question because they're looking at a proving gallery, and they'll skip over that photo. Where if you do it, like I do my headshots the same way as you, I tether, but for our portrait work, like our family and dogs and all that stuff that we do in-person sales. But we do it over Zoom, but we do in-person sales for
Right.
the same reason, where we go through, we've already pre-culled the best photos, but
Right.
then we're going through them with our clients one-on-one. And we've had clients say, well, I really just want a proving gallery so I have time. Every single time that I have said, okay, I'll do it for you, it's backfired on me where it didn't turn into a good sale. And
Right.
B, even more so, it took 2 months to get them to make a final decision because it was back and forth with emails. They don't respond to email as fast as I respond to email. And
Right.
it's just a headache because you're like, oh, I've got to follow up with Pete because he hasn't made his decision yet. And then after a while, I just forget about Pete. I'm like, I'm not going to
Yeah,
keep
you just
bugging Pete because he
yeah,
obviously doesn't want his photos, but I want the
right.
money. You know what I'm saying? So there is such a huge value to working with your client one-on-one. And if you're afraid of making that, the only way you can do it is just by doing it,
Right.
and like when I first started, I'm sure it was the same thing. You had friends that you had come in and you were doing photos, and I would say, hey, can I sell to you like I would sell to a normal client? And you don't have to buy anything, but I'm going to treat you like a normal client. And I would be very honest and very frank because these were my friends, and they wanted to see me succeed. And they're like, yeah, sure. So I sold with them and I flubbed it up and I screwed it up. And I was just like, okay, I wouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have whatever. And I learned so that when I got a client that was a paid person that I had no idea was coming into my studio, I felt more comfortable with it. But you have to do some of those mocks before you actually do the real thing and get thrown into the fire.
I totally agree. And it's funny that you bring that up because I can tell you, well, I have a buddy of mine who I coach and mentor, and he's kind of like my assistant photographer now. And he was at the studio the other day. I had a client come in, and so he watched me do my whole thing and my whole spiel with the client. And then when the client left, and it was a new hire, so the guy had a 20-minute session, but within 5 minutes, we got an awesome photo. He loved it. He left. He was thrilled. So probably the whole process took like 10, 15 minutes from start to finish with the guy. And he said to me after the guy left, he's like, you become like a different person when the client comes in. It's like, it's almost like a performance. I said, yes. I said,
It's
that's
100%.
exactly it. I said, and that's something I learned from being a musician. Like when you go out on that stage, you're in your performance mode, and it's not in like a phony sort of way. It's like when the client comes in, you want to have your system so well refined that you are able to interact with them and do your thing so that it's almost like a performance, and it's seamless. And so that does come with, I've done the same thing as you invite friends in and you take their photos and you build your skills, you build your rapport. And then also it just comes from having a lot of clients. So you need to just the more people you shoot, the better you become at this. There's no secret, there's no magic pill. Like every face I photograph, I learn something. And you know what, one of the biggest places where I've learned a lot about how to move people around to make them look their best is at those like 40, 30, 50 people on a corporate gig in one day, where you literally have 5 minutes to figure out, how do I make this person look good who's like very average looking person. And so you just have to book and book and book clients. And like if you don't have clients, the more friends and family you can shoot. Like when I started, I bugged all my friends and family, and I forgot to mention that from before. But yeah, before you go out reaching out to strangers, you just start with your friends and family and you bug them, get them in front of your lights, and use that to kind of hone your skills.
Yeah, I love like Peter always says, everybody has a face. Go photograph it. It's like there's
It's
plenty
that
of faces
simple.
out there for you to photograph.
They're
But like,
everywhere.
but and some of this comes back to, the gear is one thing, and investing in, like this is kind of the last little thing I want to touch on is the mentorship and the lesson
Right.
and the learning and all that stuff. But you know, the gear and learning how to use your gear and perfect your gear and lighting and all that stuff. Like I tell Peter this all the time, I'm not active in the headshot crew because I'm not doing a ton of headshots. And I told Peter that, and he goes, dude, you're making plenty of money doing what you're doing. You don't need the headshot crew. That's totally cool. I get it. And it's nothing that like I've learned so much, and I tell people this. I'll tell people this because I go and have dinner. Like he's come to Houston 3 times in the last year and a half, and I go out to dinner with them, or I go hang out with the people that come to the course and whatever, and just chit chat and all that stuff. But I'll mention it all the time. I learned so much from Peter that I use in my business just in doing family photography. And I do the key fill kick, but just with a lot bigger lights, right?
Yeah.
And for the majority of what I shoot for families and dogs and stuff. But even more so, I learned then I'll say this is my biggest thing I got from Peter: how to interact with my client.
Right.
And Peter is a genius at it. I remember when I first started out, I had the Hurleyisms on my phone and I had it on a stand, and I'd be looking at it on the side like as I was shooting, and they would be popping up on my phone, and I would use these stupid sayings that Peter came up with or other people came up with, and I would use them, and then I would start finding things that worked for me. and it was
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
exact same thing that I do in the portrait world. Like, when I have little kids, my biggest thing is say automatopoeia, because it's a stupid word and they laugh every single time and they can't pronounce it when they're 2 or 3 or 4 years old, and it makes them laugh. But then I get that laugh. I get that, I have people look at each other because it's uncomfortable to look at each other. When you look at each other, you start laughing, and then that laugh becomes a natural laugh. But it's creating your shtick, as Peter would say,
Right.
But all that to be said, more than the gear, more than the lights, more than the backdrops, more than everything else, it's what are you doing to prepare yourself and make yourself good for when you're performing, as you just said, in front of your client. I used to have a note on my desk that said, don't let the client dictate the session, you dictate the session.
Mhm.
Because like clients will say, oh, I want to do, I'm like, no, I know it works and I know it doesn't work, and that's probably not going to work. And so, but you have to kind of dictate that. But what I mean by that is when you are the director, when you come in with that hat on, with that persona of, I'm going to direct, I'm going to show you what I know, I'm going to do what I do, and I have my shtick, then you're killing it. So that's where, like, when you said this at the beginning of the podcast, invest in yourself and those things more than anything else. Going to Peter Hurley's intensive, go to, a clinic that's one-on-one. Like, I love like Image USA and WPPI and all that stuff, and you can get something out of that. But I feel like you can get so much more out of going to these smaller things with, it's just a handful of photographers and you're just diving in deep. You get to ask questions, you get that one-on-one. Like, I'm not here to promote Peter Hurley today, but I will. If you go to his intensive, regardless of what you're shooting, you're going to get tons out of it that's going to help you in the portrait world. And it's worth every penny to go to it.
Right. I agree. I agree. Mentorship, it really is everything. And it's worked for me. So I can only say what's worked for me. And I think you need to also embrace your personality. Like one of the mistakes I think people make is they try to become someone else.
I
And
tried to
so,
be Peter when I first started, and it did not
right.
work because I am
We
not
all
Peter
did.
Hurley.
Exactly. And we all did, and we all fell flat. And then people look at us like, what? I mean, we say a joke that maybe he can say that works great, but it doesn't work for you, or whatever it is. But as you do it, you do figure out, well, how, like this is me being me. And then people will respond to that. And that doesn't mean everyone has to be like, I'm from New York. I'm loud. I joke. I'm sarcastic. I rub people the wrong way a lot, like unintentionally, when it comes to the way I joke and stuff. So that's just me. That's my personality. So I can be kind of loud and joke around with my clients, but I make sure they have a good time. It's fun. But if you're quiet and that's not your personality, that's totally okay. You just have to figure out how your personality works with what you're doing. I don't think you should try and become someone else, because you want to, otherwise you're just going to not be genuine. And one piece of advice that I think is a good wrapping things up piece of advice for anyone who wants to be good at anything: stop caring about what people think about you. Okay?
Amen.
Like, this for me was key. I got to the point when I started, I was doing my photography for a little while. This maybe a year into my headshot business, and I remember I had a conversation with my wife. I said, I really want to care less about what people think about me. And then 2 days later, I got an email from F Stoppers, and they said, "Oh, congratulations! Thank you for submitting the application. We'd like to offer you a job as a staff writer." And I had sent this in a month before. I forgot that I even did it. And I got to tell you, writing for F Stoppers was like, that was like the universe telling me, "Oh, you want to care less about what people think about you? Here you go. Enjoy this comment section."
I see your posts about like, oh yeah,
Yeah. And then,
Pete, maybe if you don't know, Pete likes to post like these people that say these crazy outlandish things that he doesn't know what he's talking about, and his response.
yeah, so on my YouTube channel, that was the second way I started to learn, like, okay, you want to not care about what people think about you. This will get you there fast, because people will be so mean. You think, well, I'm talking about cameras. How controversial can it be? But people will post the nastiest, craziest things, accuse you of things. And so I've gotten in the habit of, when someone trolls me, I just post a silly reply, and then post it to my Instagram story for people to enjoy. Which actually, I got that. I saw Jared Poland doing that. Frono's Photo does that. When he gets a crazy comment, he'll just post on his story. And so I'm like, that's funny. I'm going to do that. But that's what, if you want to be successful, if you want to do anything with your life, I don't care. If you want to be a bowler and you just want to, if you want to have fun and enjoy whatever you do, you got to just stop caring about what people think,
Well,
because
and you have to have in business, you have to have some thick skin because you're going to come
oh,
across
definitely.
the more you do business, the more you're going to come across clients that are like I see it all the time in like, these photography groups and stuff that people post and it's kind of a pet peeve of mine to be honest that people post I had this client that said this thing and did this thing. It's just like what should I do? It's just like respond. I mean, I like you have to be able to know just how would you respond or how would you want to be responded to if somebody
Right.
said that to you, or
Exactly.
like if you said that to, whatever. And so it's just you have to grow thick skin because there's going to be people and you think they come in, man, we joke in our business with my salesperson and stuff that some of the people we have when we come in and do the session, we're like, man, this person was awesome. They were the best client. They were so much fun to photograph. And then they get into the sales session and it's a totally different persona,
Oh boy.
And I
Yep.
mean, it doesn't happen often, but it happens. And you just have to be able to work with that and you have to take the high road, not that the
Right.
customer's always right or whatever, but you can't respond and be the nasty jerk in response. You just have to be like, hey, okay, I'm sorry you feel that way or whatever the situation is. But no,
Yeah.
I mean, that's so good and it's so gold. There's so many pieces of information that's just gold nuggets. With that said, I know, Pete, you work with people, you have your own little coaching group and all that stuff. How would somebody that wants to like, man, I gotta like work with this Pete Coco guy a little bit more? How would I get in touch with Pete or how would I get into your coaching and mentoring kind of group?
So you can follow me on Instagram at Pete Coco Photo. And then I also have a Facebook group, which is Pete Coco. It's like headshot and portrait mentoring with Pete Coco. You can find me there.
Yeah, we'll put
And
these in the
then,
show notes, by the way,
yeah.
everybody. So
And then if people want to really spend a lot of time with me, they can join. I have like a little private group I started for those who really want to just dive into like the three things we talked about: photography skills, business skills, life skills. So we can put the link in there too. And that we do like weekly meetups. We have challenges. We talk about all the kinds of things we talked about today. And yeah, that's what I'm doing. And
no, go
yeah,
ahead.
it's no, I was just gonna say it's been awesome. It's a great journey. I feel like every day is a new adventure for me. So I'm really enjoying it.
No, that's awesome. I like Pete. It's truly been a pleasure. I've been wanting to do this with you since I been following you for so long, and I know I reached out to you and you were like, "Let's do it and let's go." But it's truly been a pleasure. You're awesome, and I love the nuggets of information you've given here. And this is just scratching the iceberg of what like the photography world is like. Follow Pete. He puts out great YouTube content. He puts out great content on just his Facebook pages and stuff like that. Follow his free side or whatever his Facebook group. He's always putting out stuff. He's a lot like me. He just kind of puts it out there and says it what it is. But yeah, thanks Pete for being on here. I appreciate you. Good luck with continuing on your business and everything. And it was truly a pleasure having you on today.
Thanks, man. It was my pleasure, and same for you, man. Best wishes for the business, and as we continue in 2024, I'm sure it's going to be a very adventurous year.
All right. Thanks, man. Talk to you later. Bye.
All right.